Hello. Hello. My name is Steve, and welcome to this Q&A thing. Strange, slightly odd thing to do. I'm looking at this screen. If I look over here, it's because I'm looking at the other screen, which has got the questions on it. And I might as well just start from the top and hopefully not be too dull. Question one. I don't know who sent the questions in. So if you sent the question in, thank you for doing that. It doesn't have on my list who sent them, so I can't say hello to you individually. But, you know, you'll know who you are. First question is, what does a producer do? Well, the thing about a job title like producer is that it is a very broad job title. And I guess I could describe what I do broadly. I guess that's what I do is what a radio producer does. And in telly, it's not a million miles different in comedy. Anyway, that's what when I've worked in television, I worked in comedy. And they're not a million miles apart, except in telly, I think this is one of the questions later on is what's the difference between television and radio. But in telly, there are more people and there's just many more people and much more money involved. So there are just lots of more people with executive titles and that sort of thing, but that's all marvelous. And forgive me already if I'm waffling, but a producer, my job is to see a project through from the beginning to the end. So if it's a radio show for, say, BBC Radio 4, I will either think of the idea of the programme or be working with writers who have come up with an idea for, let's say, you know, a comedy program, a sitcom, a comedy show I've got on air right now. It's on BBC Radio Wales, and it is called Bravo 2 Charlies. And I can, you know, in terms of what my job as producer was, there were two writers that I knew who came to me and said, "We've got this idea for a program. What do you think?" And I said, "That's really funny. I really like it. And I think we should do this, this, and this to make it better. And what do you think about that?" And one of the best bits of being a producer is working closely with creative people like writers and artists and performers later on down the line. So we then, between us, work out what we think is the best thing to do to make that idea sellable. Because that's a large part of what a producer's job is getting, in terms of development, is getting stuff from the idea stage to being able to pitch it to people at broadcasters who will decide whether or not they actually want that program on the air. So that's what we did. We worked on it and we pitched it, and we went to Radio Wales and we said, we think you should do this program. We think it's really funny. We'd have these people writing it and these kind of people in it. And they either say yes or they say no. Luckily with that one, they said yes. So then the next stage of a producer's job is the planning stage, where you work out what needs doing and roughly when it needs to be done in order for the program to be ready to go on the air for when the broadcasters want it. So there's a lot of planning and diary work, and you work with the writers, because the writing stage is really exciting, but again takes a long time. To write 6 scripts from scratch, well, depending on how quickly they write, can take anything from, I guess, 6 months to 18 months, I suppose, depending on how quickly they work and how many other things they've got on. So as a producer, you're overseeing all of that development work, and you're overseeing the scripts as they go along, and you are working with the writers to make the scripts as best as they can possibly be. And then as you head towards the recording dates, you're hiring technical people to record the programs, and you're hiring the actors who are involved with acting in the programs. And then on the day of when you're actually going to be recording it, the producer is also the director. So you direct all the actors and you work out what needs doing and whether they can do it better and so on and so forth. And then when that's done, it's the editing, which is another very different but associated creative process, where you are working sometimes with the writers, depends on how you work, but to take all the recorded material that you've got and turn that into a radio program. And it's the same thing. It could be the same thing. You could apply all these rules to television. It's the same sort of thing, except there are more people involved and there are pictures to worry about. And then once you've edited the program, you've got to deliver it. And so you've got to make sure that it's all done and edited and technically it's all sort of done and dusted. That's another question that we come to in a minute about technical side of things. That varies from producer to producer, but we'll come to that when we need to. And while you're doing all these things, you're also looking after money, which some people like doing. I don't mind doing it. And you're overseeing a budget. You've got a certain amount of money that you're allowed to spend on different aspects of the production. And once you have got your head around all that, you've got to make sure that by the end of the process, you haven't spent more money than you've got, which will land you in a great deal of trouble, potentially. So that's what a producer does, is see something through from the very beginning to the very end, whereas other people in the process, writers, sometimes directors in telly, are brought in at different points along the way. So I think that's a reasonable answer to that question. What's different? Another question. What's different when you produce something for TV and when you produce something for radio? Well, the obvious and rather glib answer is pictures, but it's hugely different. I mean, the process of moulding a script is they're not a million miles apart. I've done films a few years ago, did a film for BBC Two, and it's not a million miles away from doing something for the radio, except you work more closely with a lot more people. You've got, in radio, you might have one or two people helping you on the technical side during the process. In television, that can easily be 20 people before you even blink an eye, because there are so many specialist jobs involved in television, especially in drama and comedy. From the technical side with lighting and sound and camera operators, and then you've got things like location managers. You've got if you're working in a studio, you've got sort of studio people. You've got makeup and hair and costume, and there's probably a whole tract of things that I'm not even going to mention. You see at the end of any TV show that you watch, that long string of names that comes up at the end. Well, all those people are involved in different sorts of ways in different departments in television. So when you are thinking about comedy on radio and television, the producer's job is largely the same. It's to make sure that the program is as funny a program as you can make it, and whether that involves pictures that people are going to see on a TV screen or a computer, or images that are created in people's heads, which is what I have taken. It's always been my love. That's been my first love. Which brings me on to question 3. Did you always like radio programs? Yes, is the honest answer to that. I was not brought up in a household that listened to what we might now call speech radio, which is a lot of what I do for BBC Radio 4 and BBC Radio Wales, and occasionally for Radio 3. But I was brought up in a house that listened to the radio and had music on. It was a musical sort of household as a kid. But I loved the radio. That's my story. From being about 10 years old, I suppose, when in 1980 there was a local radio station opened up in the city where I was born, and I thought it was exciting and interesting, and sort of I listened and then started to get involved with it, and we'll comment on that in a second. I think one of the questions further down the line. But then we were at school, my little story, if you like, and one of the English teachers, Mr. Harwood, he listened to Radio 4, and he loved a show that is still running and was running until very recently, called Just a Minute, which has run on the BBC since I think the mid-1960s. It's an old-fashioned sort of show, but it's very funny. and it involves being able to talk a bit like this, being able to talk on a subject for a minute without hesitation, deviation, or repetition. Now, I'd have very much already failed on all those fronts in this talk, but we did it at school. We did it as a bit of fun in the classroom, and he said, "Oh, this is actually on the radio. You can listen to this being played. It's really funny." And so that was the reason I went looking for radio comedy, because I thought, well, might be quite good. And I fell in love with it. I heard shows that I did not expect to hear. I heard all sorts of stuff. And then as I got older, so when I was sort of 17, 18, 19, it became a real passion and a real habit. And you become a little bit nerdy about it, and you get, like a lot of people do, into different things. You just kind of get into. And so I got into radio. And that's the next question. In fact, it's almost as if someone's written these down in some sort of logical order. And it wasn't me. How did I become a producer? It's a good question. And broadly, it would probably still be the same now, kind of ish, but we'll come on to that a bit later as well. My story was that I'm from Coventry, a city in the Midlands, and while I was at school, I sort of got kind of vaguely involved as a sort of listener and would write letters, or you might now these days be doing emails or tweets or whatever to the station. But they were kind of, well, they were kind of funny, and they were thought of as being kind of funny or quirky. And I wrote various things in and got very involved with the shows. And as I got older, I asked some of the presenters who I sort of got to know a little bit just through writing in and speaking on the phone and that kind of thing, doing phone-ins and stuff, whether I could come in and help. And so I came in and answered the phones for quizzes and that sort of thing. And once you're in the door at a place like that, if you are useful and don't get in the way and occasionally have helpful things to say, then people will say, "Oh, you could help on this, or you can help on that." So I did that, and then at the same time waited to do, and they still exist, and they still are very, very useful in lots of different ways, a thing called hospital radio. Lots of hospitals have a hospital radio system set up to entertain the staff and patients in hospitals. And I did a bit there and helped out there. And then I went to college in Leeds, and luckily one of the tutors at the college asked if anybody wanted to get some work experience at the local BBC station, and I put my hand up and was then invited to try out to see whether I'd be any use to them doing some research, which I did every couple of weeks, and did that for a year or so. They paid me, not very much, but they paid me. Certainly made it worth my while. I'd probably have done it for nothing, to be honest, but it was good as a student to have a few pounds. It was £25 a fortnight for 5 scripts, which these days doesn't seem very much now I think about it, but it was good then. So I wrote to them after I graduated. I finished in my final year. I finished doing the research work and said I really need to focus on my degree. I got my degree, and then when I'd done my exams, I wrote to them and said, "Can you give me a job?" Expecting the answer no. If I'm absolutely honest, I didn't. But I thought, well, if you've got to ask, you've got to, if you don't ask, no one's just going to, knock top of your shoulder in the street and say, "Do you fancy working for the BBC?" So I wrote, and they said, "Well, come in and have an interview." Very informal. I think this was the late 1980s, which seems like ancient history. But it was much more informal in those days. There's probably a more formal way of doing this sort of thing these days because of transparency and accountability and so on and so forth, which are all very, very important. But I was given an opportunity to go in and see a member of management at Radio Leeds, and they happened to have some shifts in the newsroom available, and I literally started the next morning. It was what they call casual work, that we now call freelance. And I worked from week to week, and I got some shifts here and some shifts there. And then eventually they realised that you are useful to them, and an opportunity comes along, and I applied for a job, actually applied for an actual job, filled in the forms, had the interviews, and got the job. And so I worked then for Radio Leeds for 2 years before continuing to apply for jobs. I got a job in London, working in what's called the presentation department of BBC Radio 4, which I worked for a year before applying to become a trainee producer in the comedy department at the BBC, which doesn't exist in the same way as it did, but I was very, very lucky and I applied. There was something like 5,000 applicants for these 4 jobs, these 4 one-year contracts, and I got one of the one-year contracts, and never looked back. If I'm honest, I was lucky. I worked very hard and started to make stuff. Started to work on shows that existed already. I was handed on things like the news quiz and a program called the News Headlines and a program called Counterpoint, all sort of different quizzes and sketch shows and entertainment shows. And you learn how to be a producer on the job, and that was great fun. So that's how I became a producer. And then once you have that sort of job title, it's like passing an informal sort of exam, and that's when you start to be taken more seriously in the industry, and you get to do what you want to do, as much as doing stuff that you're told to do. And then I, as it happens, followed a well-trodden path out of radio into television, where I worked for quite a long time. I made a show called Have I Got News For You, and which is still on. And I made a show called Never Mind the Buzzcocks, which is not still on. And I made some other stuff in television and various things, and then ended up. The long sort of personal, boring sort of story. We came to Wales, and then I set up on my own. That's the long story. So that's how I set up Giddy Go Productions. So, do you think radio can be relevant to teenagers? Yes, of course it is. I mean, I think so. Certainly, audio content, as we have learned to call it, can be relevant to teenagers. I mean, here's the thing, if the audio content that you want to hear isn't there, then make it. Then you do it. Because it doesn't take brain surgery to turn your ideas into something. If you think your ideas are going to be popular and useful to other people, interesting to other people in your generation, then podcasting, which has revolutionized the whole world of audio communications in the past few years, are totally available for you to do. Making those is down to you and how much effort you're willing to put into something. No one, I'm afraid, at least not immediately, is going to pay you to make podcasts for them. But if you make something that's good and that turns out to be popular and is relevant and is entertaining and works, then you will find very quickly that there will be people who will be very interested in finding out who you are and finding out if they can get you to work for them. Because everybody in my industry, everyone on my side of the management fence is always looking for new talented people, always to work with in different sorts of ways. And I think, look, see, what advice would you give to someone who wants to get into TV production? Is just the best advice now is, if you can, just get on and do it. If you've got a phone or a laptop, you have got sufficient media facilities to make stuff. It's not going to look like television that you'll see on the box in the corner, but every one of you will be familiar with YouTube. Every one of you will have seen stuff on YouTube that you think, I could do that. That's what you need to do. Because if you want to get through the door in a big or an existing TV production company, the best way to do that is to show them that you can do it already, and that you're good at it, and that you've got new ways of doing things and new ideas, and you can talk to the audiences that they are trying to talk to. Now, that's easy to say, but very difficult to actually do. Not impossible. I mean, every television production company wherever they are, whether they're in Cardiff, Manchester, Liverpool, London, Birmingham, Leeds, and Edinburgh, Glasgow, Belfast, they're all TV production centres. Leeds is hugely growing, or will be, because of Channel 4 moving to Leeds. Manchester and Salford is a big production hub now, and London is still the biggest. But you don't have to go to London to get a job in television. They'll all want you to be able to demonstrate that you know what you want to do, and that you've already done it, and you've thought about it, and you've got a show reel to show them. That will be a huge advantage to you. It's very easy for me to sit here and say that, and it's very easy for you to go, yeah, I could do that. The hard bit is actually getting up and going outside and doing it. But it's what you need to do. Which is I'm flipping back to which is the most interesting to work in TV or radio. Well, I mean, I guess, without sounding like Grandpa in the corner, I've learned to identify what I like doing, and what I like to be able to work and combine with my own life. It's very easy in the media, and certainly is the case when I was younger, certainly, and when people are younger in the industry, they give every waking moment of their day to work, really hard, keep going, and that's great. So television is interesting, but here's the thing. In my experience, television is full of, there's an awful lot of people looking at what you're doing and telling you how to do it better, or telling you that you're doing it wrong, or telling you that you're doing it too expensively, or telling you that, lots of different things. Radio is by nature a smaller and more intimate medium, and you are much more hands-on and much more in control of what you want to do, and there are far fewer people who have a vested interest in telling you not to do it. That's in my experience anyway. I like radio because you can have an idea, pitch it, and then 2 weeks later, depending on what the idea is, you can be doing it. It'll be on the air and people can hear it, or they can download it, or they can stream it. Whereas television, things are generally, even quick turnaround things are a lot a lot slower than that. So I like radio, but then you might like television, and that's fine. Television is not going away. Television is not going away. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to get into television production? I think we sort of talked about that. The key advice is doing it, watching it, trying to understand it, try to understand the industry a bit, try to watch a lot of television. I think it's like, if you want to be a writer, you need to read a lot of books and write and practice, but you need to understand how it's done well first, I think. And then you can, once you've understood how it's done well, you know how to judge your own work. My own journey into television was through radio. That isn't the case necessarily. That was good for me because it meant I didn't necessarily have to go up through the ranks in television of, a run. I was never a runner in television. There are other people. A friend of mine who's now a very successful television producer, works on a lot of high-profile programs, comedy and topical comedy shows. When I was at Have I Got News For You, he was the runner. Now, the runner is the person on the team who literally runs and gets things. So gets lunch, gets the papers, fills the photocopier, makes the tea, does all the different bits and pieces that are vital. But who's at the, if you think about it as a triangle, they're at the bottom of the triangle, and then you work your way up the triangle. Mark, as his name, was the runner when I was producer of I Got News For You, and he worked his way up. So he was a runner, and then he was a researcher, and then he was what they call an AP, which is an assistant producer. And then there are various, once you get to AP, there are all sorts, some people stay at AP level for years and really like it because they're involved with the industry that they like, and they can specialise in different things. So you'll get APs who, what they call shooting APs, so they'll go out, they'll be able to use a camera and they'll shoot stuff for a programme, depending on what the programme is, that's used in the programme, but they're not ultimately responsible for things. They're sort of, it's all sort of there, but their little bit. You have researching APs, you have all sorts of different sorts of APs, and then you make the big leap then to being the producer, or a producer, because then there are always layers of producers as well. You've got producers, series producers on programs, executive producers, all sorts of different producers, edit producers, and a producer means you've got some sort of editorial control, not necessarily the complete editorial control, but you've got some sort of editorial input, which you probably wouldn't have if you're a researcher or an AP. You aren't at that table. You're not at the table of people who are making the decisions about what something will look like. You might be able to chip in from the other side of the room, but you're not at the table. What other advice would I give for someone with television production is not giving up. Persistence is very, very important. And not giving up when the first person says no, because they will say no. At first, no one's going to be that interested. And something somewhere along the line, somebody will say, yeah, okay, come on, have a go. That will happen eventually. If you're cut out to work in the media. I guess that's one of the things I would say, again, as an old man of media, is I have gone to give talks a bit like this, but face to face, at universities and colleges all over the UK. Actually, I've been all over the place. And the one thing I think is fair to say is you look around the room and you'll be a room full of people doing media studies, and you will point out the two people in the room who will go and have a career in the media, a successful career in the media, because you will know who they are, because they have a certain spark. They have a certain look, I suppose, in their eyes. They're sort of awake and switched on and keen. And it doesn't mean that they are the know-all, but it just they're ones whose brains are engaged with what you're talking about. And you need to be one of those people. And people like me look for people like you, because everybody needs new people. Everybody needs new people. It's if you want to do it, you've got to really work hard though. Do you think it's better to do a degree in production or try and get a job in radio or TV straight after school? I did my degree in it was called Communication and Cultural Studies in those days, with public media, because it was the old days, and there were only 3 media courses in the UK then, one in Leeds, one in Bournemouth, and one in Warrington. And I liked it because it enabled me to get a degree and prove to the world that I was bright enough to get a degree. But while I was doing it, I was doing the thing that I knew I liked doing. So I was able to we did a bit of telly and we did a bit of radio, but I was able to specialise in radio and music, which is the way that my degree course was. Now, there are people who, if you are the kind of person who wants to get in at the bottom and be a runner and work your way up, I imagine these days most runners will have in telly. Most runners will have a degree. They are not using their degree, fetching tea and coffee and things, but that's sort of not the point. What they've done is demonstrate a dedication to an industry, a dedication to wanting a career in a particular industry. And, if the thing is, I can only talk about entertainment and comedy. There are whole worlds of grown-up proper broadcasting, documentaries, nature programming, sport, news. All of these things are equally, if not more valid and in more demand than entertainment and comedy. But comedy is kind of a sexy thing that people seem to think that, well, I did. It's cool. Comedy's great. It's funny. Making people laugh is great. It's really, you can go to bed at night thinking, yeah, I did a good thing. We did a thing today which made a whole room full of people laugh. And hopefully when it goes on the radio or TV, we'll make a whole country laugh. And that's a nice feeling. But then the same can be said of drama, the same can be said of, brilliant documentary makers. It's good. Right. I realise I'm waffling on now, but question 9. Do you have to be good with technology to work in production? Not necessarily, but it helps. In radio, because the technology now means that I can do an awful lot of things that, well, I won't say 10, more like 20 years ago would have involved lots of different people and studios and big expensive equipment. I can do literally on the computer that I'm talking to you via now. I learned pretty early on that having the control of the means of production is a useful thing to have, but it's absolutely not compulsory at all, especially in television, unless you want to work on the technical side. I was quite contentedly a television producer and a reasonably successful television producer, and I have absolutely no idea one end of a camera to the other. Microphones I'm pretty confident with, that's just an interest. Lighting, makeup, hair, costume, design, colours, colour balancing, video editing, No idea. I mean, I've had a go, and I can use this computer, and I can pull together bits and pieces of video to make something. But I'm not a video editor. That's a real skill. So the answer to your question is yes, it can help in certain ways, but it's not compulsory. And if you want to be a TV director, you're going to need to know what the technology can do, but not necessarily how to make the technology work. It's like, if an analogy, I guess, might be like a car. You can be a really good driver without having any idea how the engine works, or what happens when you put your foot down on that pedal. You have no idea about the technology of it. So that's the answer to your question, is it can help. Okay, and the last question, who's the most famous person you've worked with? Well, I've met a lot of people, but again, it's a weird thing because I'm conscious that I'm talking to people of a young generation to me, and fame is a strange thing because somebody I think is famous and really important may not feature in your world really at all. But I guess if I have to answer the question, it would be, well, TV-wise, it would be Paul Merton, Ian Hislop, who are both on Teledu now. Have I got news for you? Eddie Izzard. Who else do I work with? All sorts of different. I mean, like in America, there's a guy I work with regularly called David Sedaris, who's an American writer. He's not hugely well known over here, but he's a big star in America. So fame is a difficult. How long is a piece of string? How well known is a thing? My daughter can talk about YouTubers or TikTok stars who are really famous in her world, but mean absolutely nothing to me. So don't get caught up in fame. Get caught up in working with talented, interesting, useful people, and ideally be one of those people yourself. I hope that's useful. That's got to the end of the questions. I hope that was useful. Not too awful. It was 37 minutes and counting, so I'll stop now. But keep trying. If you want to work in the media, you can. And don't be exploited, because there are people who will exploit you. Don't do stuff that you don't want to do, and don't do stuff for nothing if you can avoid it. Okay, thanks very much, and goodbye.